Monster flicks are a little different from other horror movies, whereby the most important part is, of course, the monster. If the beast has a shoddy costume, sloppy makeup, or unconvincing CGI, it can ruin an otherwise solid film. If the movie in question isn't that great, it's still impressive when the special effects team pull out all the stops to craft the most authentic or revolting monstrosity possible. So with that being said, I'm Jem from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 horror monster movies with amazing special effects. Number 10. Society. In Society, teenager Bill suspects his high-class family are hiding a dark secret from him. During the climax, Bill walks into his house to discover his family and friends aren't human. And just when it seems like things couldn't get worse, he finds them engaged in some kind of party where they merge their bodies into a blob for pleasure. Up until this point, only minor effects and camera tricks have been used to indicate Bill's family aren't what they seem. However, the last 15 minutes is a truly unnerving feast for the eyes, as Billy is tormented and taunted by all sorts of surreal beings, including the infamous Butthead. It's a simple touch, but the squelching sound and the participants' oily textures really sell the idea that these creatures are living organisms rather than rubber puppets. The red lighting blaring through this sequence helps to depict everyone as hellish and nightmarish creatures, magnifying their unsettling nature. Society's pacing may be slow, but it's worth sticking with it, since the ending is an absolute wonder to behold, especially for SFX pursuits. Number 9. Ghoulies II. Following the success of Ghoulies, taking home a $35 million box office haul from a $5 million budget, MGM was eager to churn out a sequel. In Ghoulies 2, the mini-fiends find themselves an amusement park where they wreak havoc on the fairground visitors. Though this follow-up isn't much better than its predecessor, the practical effects received a noticeable upgrade. Rather than looking like rubber puppets bought at a thrift store, the titular monsters now look like actual monsters. Not only that, the nasty cretins move more fluidly in the sequel. The Ghoulies movements in the first installment were limited in order to hide the puppeteers, but for Ghoulies 2, the crew relied more on stop motion to depict the critters running, scurrying, and crawling around, which still looks great decades later. Let us know what you think in the comments down below, and while you're there, drop us a cheeky like, share, and subscribe too. Number 8. The Void. Before breaking down The Void, it's worth mentioning that the budget was a pitiful $82,510. To put that sum into perspective, the body horror cost almost 10 times less than the Blair Witch Project, which was also dirt cheap. Still, despite the almost non-existent budget, The Void offers some of the most haunting monsters put to film in the last decade. What makes these decomposing creatures so scary is the way the SFX team know what to show and, more importantly, what not to. Despite being at the front and center of the story, the creatures are rarely seen directly. By relying on minimal lighting, quick cuts, and clever staging, the demonic entities are only glimpsed at for most of the runtime. This decision makes the beasts more frightening, since viewers can't say for certain what they look like, how big they are, or how many tentacles are poking out of their face. When the monsters are finally seen, you'll wish they stayed hidden. These shambling flesh heaps are so horrendous. Maestros of horror like David Cronenberg, H.P. Lovecraft, and H.R. Geiger would balk at their appearance. The Void isn't just a great creature feature, but proof that a dedicated film crew can make pure nightmare fuel despite being hampered by an inconceivably tiny budget. Number 7. Evil Dead Rise. Against the odds, Evil Dead Rise was a triumph, receiving praise for its inventive gore, seamless editing, and visceral performances. Evil Dead Rise also deserves a huge amount of praise for its visuals. According to leading star Alyssa Sutherland, the film contains no digital effects whatsoever. Instead, Cronin's team went old school, relying on prosthetics, puppetry, and 6,500 litres of blood. Fake blood, that is. By relying on these classic techniques, the remake successfully captured the spirit of the original, and because of this, horror purists should appreciate the blood-filled elevator sequence, the Deadite fusion scene, and the wall-crawling shots, knowing that they were created without computers. Some visuals are deliberately cheap to emulate Sam Raimi's work, especially the eyeball flying shot, but they still look more convincing than what the average blockbuster has to offer. Since Evil Dead Rise was a commercial and critical success, let's hope it incentivizes movie studios to put more focus on practical effects in future projects. I mean, they won't, but it's nice to dream. Number 6. Brain Dead. In terms of special effects, there are no films in Peter Jackson's repertoire as visually awe-inspiring as his Lord of the Rings trilogy, but Braindead is a very close second. The visuals in this rom-com can be summarised in one word: relentless. Some scenes can't go more than 2 seconds without a jaw-dropping special effect being thrown in, and before the audience has time to process what they saw, another sensational visual's tossed in, and another and another and another. But the special effects aren't just great, they're super gross. Braindead contains an avalanche of vomit-inducing moments that will test the biggest horror veterans, especially the dinner sequence. The third act has so many creative sequences, it overloads the senses. Faces are ripped off, teeth are pulled out, rib cages are wrenched from bodies, legs are eaten to the bone, a zombie toddler bursts out of a woman's head, and a 10-foot tall monster stuffs her son into her womb. Also, words cannot convey how ludicrous the undead spicy scene is. Number 5, the Blob. The concept of an evil blob growing in size as it consumes everything in its path is terrifying, but it's challenging to make this shapeless entity seem intimidating. No matter how big the blob gets or how many people it swallows, it still resembles pink goo. Despite this, the 1988 version of the Blob looks fantastic. Though it didn't fare well with critics or at the box office, it's impossible to fault the remake's visuals. For the most part, the Blob is played by a gel-filled quilt. The ooze seeps out of the covering, giving the illusion the vicious monster is moving. Other techniques were utilised for certain scenes, including stop motion and puppetry, and the shot of the creature flowing under the door was achieved with a crew member wearing blob mittens. Probably the most impressive effect isn't of the Blob itself, but the victims. Since the ill-formed entity is corrosive, anyone enveloped in its body is reduced to bone in seconds. The shots of the Blob's victims melting are so convincing, it's difficult to tell when the actors are swapped out for puppet or a doll. Number 4, Little Shop of Horrors. Little Shop of Horrors was destined to have groundbreaking visuals, considering it was directed by Frank Oz, who performed the puppetry for The Muppets, The Dark Crystal, and Star Wars. And yet, the beloved musical still surpassed expectations. Though the song and dance routines are top-notch, nothing competes with the man-eating Audrey II. Rather than relying on blue screens or optical effects, the fiendish flower was brought to life with an army of puppeteers, 60 in total. It goes without saying that Audrey II's vocals are performed phenomenally. However, the mean green mother from outer space is so well designed and handled, it's easy to pick up on Audrey II's sassy personality, even if it didn't speak. Seriously, watch the flower shop scenes on mute and you'll have no problem reading the carnivorous plant's expressions. Number 3, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Early in production for Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola decided to use old cinematic visuals to emulate the story's time period. When the SFX team told Coppola his vision was impossible without digital technology, the Godfather director had them fired and replaced with a new crew, led by his own son, Roman. Coppola's actions may have been harsh, but you can't argue with the results. The visual team created eye-watering effects by utilising reverse footage, forced perspective, multiple exposures, miniatures, and matte paintings. Excluding one optical effect, every special effect was created on set. The opening, where Dracula's beloved falls from the window, was achieved with a doll, and the green mist in Mina's room was achieved through mirrors and double exposure. Also, let's not forget about the Prince of Darkness himself. Throughout the movie, Dracula is depicted as a mortal, a wolf, an elder, a demon, and a bat creature, which were all devised by a team of sculptors and makeup artists. The prosthetics for the titular vampire's demonic forms are so detailed, it boggles the mind how modern CGI struggles to look half as convincing. Even though Dracula's multiple designs are superb, it's refreshing how the SFX crew put in as much effort in every other visual, no matter how minor. Number 2, An American Werewolf in London. It would be blasphemous to exclude An American Werewolf in London on this list, since it was the first feature to receive an Academy Award for Best Makeup. Almost half a century later, it's still hard to think of a single movie that can contend with Rick Baker's career-defining visuals. Though the effects for the Nazi demons and Undead Jack are stellar, nothing contends with the scene where David changes into a werewolf. Norton wore several costumes throughout this sequence to convey the multiple stages of his transformation. However, an elaborate animatronic was employed for key shots. This mechanical body had maneuverable bones that shifted and elongated to give the impression David's shoulders, spine, fingers, feet, and skull were reconfiguring into wolf form. The shot of David's face sprouting a protruding snout only lasts 7 seconds, but still managed to become an iconic moment of cinema. Even though any visuals can age badly, this metamorphosis is still top tier by today's standards. As a result, it's easy to understand how an American werewolf in London literally changed the face of horror. And number 1, The Thing. There's no argument why John Carpenter's sci-fi horror is hailed as the peak of practical effects. Although this 1982 remake was meant to center around a generic alien, makeup designer Rob Bottin convinced the Halloween director to turn the titular villain into a creature that can change its form. To make the shapeshifter look convincing, Bottin relied on a 35-member crew, which included painters, puppeteers, mold makers, sculptors, mechanical technicians, and even a hairstylist. This special effects team worked wonders even when ideas fell apart or plans changed at the last second. When Bottin's crew ran out of time to construct the dog thing animatronic, they settled for a foam latex puppet with radio-controlled eyes. Despite the rushed job, the final result is a work of art. Also, one element in The Thing that doesn't get enough credit is the lighting. Cinematographer Dean Cundy worked with Bottin to ensure the extraterrestrial was lit at specific angles to hide its artificiality. And Cundy deserved almost as much praise as Bottin, since the creature would have looked awful if it was lit or angled incorrectly. Even though every facet of The Thing is on top form, there is no question that Rob Bottin's work is the highlight.